I came here to see how they would operate on the first day that they had lost Steve Jobs. I also came here to mourn his death in my own way. I feel that it is such a pity today. He created these gadgets that change people's perceptions of machines. But he did not manage to witness the last step in which, through his gadgets, people's lives would be effectively fused with these machines.
After his death, I do not know whether Apple can stay up there in the next few years or in the next 10 years. I wonder what kind of products Apple can produce that is as popular as iPhone 4. It's like Einstein's death. Who else can invent something like the electric bulb that can be as important in people's lives?
You're watching CNN, the world's news leader. This is World One, live from London. I'm Monita Rajpal.
And I'm Zain, Verjee.
Steve Jobs' legacy isn't just in the products he created, it's also in Apple itself, currently the second most valuable company in the world, with a market value of more than $340 billion. In fact, Jobs had an enormous influence on business generally, how companies act, how they present themselves, and how they must adapt to changing times.
Really hard to overstate just how important Steve Jobs has been to business, to the economy, what he's done, because he's really revolutionized so many businesses.
What Jobs recognized was that the introduction of the product is your one chance to send a message to the public about what this thing is. And he treated it like a Hollywood premiere.
An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it?
The secrecy and the kind of theater that Apple brings to every product launch, every other company in the world, whether they're in, electronics, consumer electronics, or clothing, or automobiles, they can learn from Apple and what they do.
It was a piece of theater, and he treated it like a piece of theater, and he invited the audience. He primed them like you would send out the trailers for a movie, and then he did a performance, every second of which was carefully choreographed and scripted, and rarely went wrong.
The amazing thing about him is how many businesses he has touched and revolutionized. I mean, everyone knows about the computer business, computer hardware, computer software. Then, of course, there's the music business with iTunes and the iPod. Just amazing, completely transformed that business.
The iPod and the iPod Touch and the iPhone and all the things that are portable music players, on paper they have a 90% share of the market. In fact, they own it. I mean, other people might buy other MP3 players, but they throw them away. If you look at what people are using, they're all using iPads or iPods.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone.
Steve Jobs' influence on the mobile telecommunications space is sort of manifold. For more than 100 years, telecommunications companies have exercised most of the control in the relationship with their vendors. And Apple came in, and Steve Jobs, as is his way, basically kind of bullied his carrier, in this case AT&T, to saying, you need to create a much more open environment. You need to create an environment in which the user can go anywhere they want to get any kind of information they want. If it happens to be the App Store, all the better for Apple. The other thing that happened as a result of Apple coming on the scene is that it really created a competitive environment for mobile phones that had never existed before. Google's Android owes a great debt to Apple's iPhone, because suddenly carriers that didn't have the iPhone, like Verizon and T-Mobile and Sprint, were looking for alternatives, looking for new ways to get exciting smartphones in the market.
Over the years, Steve Jobs has wowed consumers with Apple's innovative products. Here are a few favorites. In 1998, Apple ditched the traditional beige computer, replacing it with the colorful iMac. It's gone through several transformations since then. Apple now sells more than 3 million of them a quarter. In 2001, Apple gave us the iPod music player. Apple has sold more than 314 million iPods and more than 16 billion songs from its iTunes store online. Then in 2007, the game changer, the iPhone, which redefined the mobile phone market. The following year, the company sold 1 million iPhone 3G models on its launch weekend, and they were available, and consumers have downloaded more than 15 billion iPhone applications. In 2010, Jobs unveiled the iPad tablet, which analysts think could reach sales of 44 million this year alone.
Well, we've got CNN reporters around the world gauging the impact that Steve Jobs had on consumers and on contemporary culture in general. Dan Simon joins us from Cupertino, California. Paula Hancock is in Seoul in South Korea. And David McKenzie joins us from Nairobi, Kenya. Dan, let's start with you there in Cupertino. What's it like there right now where you are and we're at the headquarters of Apple?
Well, it's a bit somber. There's a makeshift memorial outside that's growing. One person actually dropped off an iPad that has Steve Jobs' picture glowing on it. But I want to talk to you about how Jobs' technology has sort of led the way and how other companies approach technology. The Macintosh, for example, the first consumer computer to have a mouse. All computers now, we all use the point and click method to get around. Then you look at the iPod. There were other, consumer electronics. There were other MP3 players. You could, put on the headphones and listen to music. But the iPod made the MP3 player popular. It encouraged other people to get in the game, like Microsoft. And there were plenty of other smartphones on the market before the iPhone came around. But now the touch screen is obviously the most important, the most popular kind of smartphone. That's the thing with Apple. They had this motto called Think Different, and it served them very well over the years. Monita?
All right, Dan, let's head over now to South Korea, Seoul, South Korea, where CNN's Paula Hancock joins us now. And what's the impact over there that Steve Jobs has had and that Apple has had over there, especially when we're talking about one of the greatest competitors that they have in that part of the world, which is Samsung?
Absolutely. When you talk about Apple here, Monita, you can't help but talk about Samsung as well. The two giants really have a love-hate relationship. At the same time that they are very codependent, they're also suing each other for alleged patent infringements all across the world. Now, Apple is actually Samsung's biggest customer when it comes to the memory chips, and Samsung's products effectively help create Apple's products, but they are suing each other around the world. But of course, today it was all about Steve Jobs, the chief executive of Samsung, saying that he was deeply saddened to hear that he had died and called him a great entrepreneur. And this is what we've been hearing on the streets here as well in Seoul. Everybody we have spoken to, and there have been many people, knew his name and had something good to say about Steve Jobs. It's quite likely that many of the same people wouldn't know who the chief executive of many of the Korean companies are, but he does have the cult status here that he does in the United States. He is known very well. As one person said to me, Jobs equals Apple, Apple equals Jobs.
All right, Paula, now we go to Nairobi in Kenya, and David McKenzie there, who joins us there live. David, we will talk about the impact that Steve Jobs has had and that Apple has had around the world, but also over where you are, the impact has been, there's been an inspiration for smaller companies to pop up now.
Well, that's right. The average MacBook Pro might cost more to a consumer than the average African might earn in an entire year. So Monita, it's more an aspirational and an inspirational brand here in Africa. Here in East Africa, I started a bit of a Twitter debate, in fact, and got people to say, well, how has Apple impacted them? Has it at all on the continent? One Twitter follower said, well, Apple has had an impact for those who design and make things, but in fact, it is an elitist product. Another one disagreed from Abuja, Nigeria. He said, I've seen taxi drivers, cattle rearers, nodding to the sounds of, yes, an iPod. So it's not elitist at all. So certainly debate raging here in Africa about the impact of Apple. My iPad, I was lying it right here, it in fact fried because of the heat. So while Apple products weren't designed for Africa, certainly they've inspired Africans and African innovators. Monita?
And I want to ask all three of you the same question. So, David, while we have you up there right now, let me ask you, in terms of how this is being covered media-wise, where you are, tell us about what people are saying in the media about Steve Jobs.
Well, certainly it's in the local channels. Our cameraman heard it on the radio going to work today. There is a sense of a conversation about this, but it's a more nuanced conversation. It's not the adulation that you might see in the US or parts of Asia of Steve Jobs and his innovations. It's more a conversation about whether Apple and whether innovation is reaching Africa enough, whether people can tie into these technologies, and whether competitors of Apple are finding cheaper solutions that are more realistic for the African consumer. But certainly a lot of admiration here.
And what about in Seoul, Paula?
Well, certainly the media has been covering this extensively. The news actually broke Thursday morning local time. So it was as everybody was waking up, everybody heard it on the radio, everybody read it or saw it on the news, the television stations, and also Twitter itself actually shut down for a short period of time Thursday morning because there were too many people on it trying to mention Steve Jobs, trying to pass on their condolences or their respect. So that actually shut down just for a short period. Too many people trying to get involved.
And of course, in the United States and California, especially in his hometown of Cuba, for Steve Jobs, how is this being? I guess how are people there in the media reacting where you are, Dan?
Well, I think there's a basic acknowledgement for people who cover Silicon Valley that this place would be a lot different without Steve Jobs and Apple. Apple is so pivotal with all the technologies you see in this area, all these great companies that have popped up in the last few years, like Facebook and Twitter. They would arguably not be as successful without Apple because most people, use social networking on their mobile devices. So this place would be much different, and I would argue not as good without Apple, not as good without Steve Jobs.
Okay, Dan Simon, Paula Hancock, and David McKenzie, thank you all very much.
This is World One live from London. We're going to have much more on Steve Jobs and Apple in the coming hours, so stay with CNN.